Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News for this Saturday. It is the 17th day of August, 2024. And as always, we have some important stories to tell you that are taking place right now that are continuing to confirm what the Bible has to say about what our world will look like in the last days before the second coming of Jesus Christ. Because first and foremost, we go to the Bible to find out what it tells us about the future. Then we look at the events around us to see how they fit with what the scripture says. And as we see here every day, it is remarkable, isn't it? How everything is falling into place. All right, the latest headlines. Hamas has now doubled down on rejecting the latest American ceasefire proposal. Northern Israel again is getting bombarded in this so-called pause in fighting. Here we go again. Pro-Hamas students are gearing up for the return of protests to college campuses as school begins next month. And in the UK, students are being taught to avoid extreme content when certain non-woke stories arise in the news so they can tell what these conspiracy theories are all about and reject them. And as we've discovered, haven't we, that many of these so-called conspiracy theories turn out to be true sooner or later. All right, let's look at the stories. Number one, headline: Hamas official: ceasefire and hostage deal must guarantee the end of the war. Well, that's a non-starter right there, unfortunately. Hamas senior official Ghazi Hamad says no major issue was agreed upon in talks in Qatar. He blames Israel for sabotaging the negotiations. A senior Hamas official told Al Jazeera on Friday that any ceasefire and hostage deal that would be signed must, quote, guarantee the war's end and a withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. And again, from Israel's perspective, that's not going to happen. The official added that any agreement must include mass humanitarian aid being sent to the Strip, which is already happening, that's stopped by Hamas of getting to the people, and the meeting of demands regarding the release of Palestinian prisoners. That's a shortcut way of saying let these murderers and terrorists that have already been, arrested, tried, and convicted, let them out to trade them for hostages that were doing nothing else but minding their own business on October 7th when they were taken hostage. All right. Meanwhile, Hamas senior official Ghazi Hamad said no major issue was agreed upon in the latest round of talks held in Qatar and blamed Israel for sabotaging the negotiations, reported Haaretz. Hamad claimed that Netanyahu is trying to present a new outline using the U.S. in an attempt to gain time. Hamad added that Hamas will not allow Israeli presence in the Strip at any phase. All right, well, they're not going to be able to call the shots on this, sadly, for them. The comments by Hamas officials follow the second day of talks on a hostage and ceasefire deal in Doha, Qatar. The U.S., Egypt, and Qatar published a statement following the talks in which they expressed optimism that an agreement will be reached before the end of next week to release hostages, save lives, bring relief to the people of Gaza, and de-escalate regional tensions. Well, again, these three countries can agree to whatever they want, but Hamas and Israel have to agree also, and therein lies the problem. U.S. President Joe Biden, lame duck President Joe Biden, subsequently stated, "We're closer than we've ever have been before to securing a hostage deal." He says, "I don't want to jinx anything, but we may have something. We're not there yet, but much closer than we were 3 days ago," he said from the White House. Then he later published a statement, this is interesting, in which he said that no party in the Middle East should undermine efforts to reach a Gaza ceasefire and hostage release deal. Okay, the two sides could not be further apart. Seemingly, this temporary ceasefire or cessation of military hostilities will not last through the next week, since no real progress is being made in ending the situation in Galilee. In other words, it's ripe for a regional war. We should expect some type of larger conflict to take place once it's determined that nothing has been resolved in these so-called new agreements that these three countries are agreed upon, but Israel and Hamas have not. And so, along that line, even during the so-called waiting period of ceasefiring, for the most part, listen to this story, headline number two: Upper Galilee targeted by dozens of Hezbollah rockets. Following the nighttime strike in southern Lebanon, which resulted in at least 10 fatalities, a direct hit was reported in the Upper Galilee on Saturday morning as Hezbollah retaliated. Shortly thereafter, the IDF struck by targeting southern Lebanon. According to Lebanese reports, approximately an hour later, over 40 rockets were launched in two barrages, leading to sirens being triggered in Safed and its vicinity. Of course, Safed's in Israel. Israeli authorities confirmed the barrage involved dozens of rockets with interceptions visible in the region's skies. Residents reported loud explosions and power outages in Safed and Hatzor HaGalit. All right, this nighttime attack has occurred against a backdrop of comments by Hezbollah associate the previous day that suggested that given the positive signals from the Doha summit, Hassan Nasrallah organization would refrain from attacking Israel during the deal negotiations. But they're not. They continued on. And we've heard from our friends again. We have quite a few people watching us from Israel, and they're all telling us the same thing, that they're on pins and needles. They said you can't imagine the how difficult it is, the tenseness that's there. You never know from moment to moment what will happen. This so-called hostage deal, everybody's looking to be the panacea that will solve everything. It's just not happening. There's not going to be a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas there in Gaza, and that's going to allow Hezbollah and Iran to do something. Now, what they do, again, nobody knows. They keep going back and forth. But as we saw yesterday, the Ayatollah said, if we don't do something against Israel, then Allah will judge us. In other words, this is something they're bound to do, and they believe this with all their heart, that they are supernaturally, divinely guided to destroy Israel, the little Satan, and the U.S., the big Satan. So we're not surprised by what we're seeing or what we will continue to see. Now, under the headline of "Here we go again," anti-Israel protests set to reignite on U.S. and Canadian college campuses as YDSA plans student strike. Now, not only you're going to see the protest on the campuses again, because some students are already going back to school, even in the middle or the late part of August. And my day is always after Labor Day in September, but you've got these schedules now where a lot of colleges are beginning to see the students come back, and the protests are happening. Now, also this week, we mentioned as an aside, you've got the Democratic Convention going on in Chicago that will be going on, and there's supposed to be a huge amount of protests there. Of course, the major news sources won't cover it. They'll try and make it sound like it's not that big a deal, but supposedly this is going to get pretty ugly. So we'll be looking at that too. So like we said, here we go again. Anti-Israeli protest. Okay, pro-Hamas college students are planning to skip classes at the start of the upcoming semester to pressure their schools to divest from Israel, according to a report by the Free Press on Monday. They're a far-left organization, this is the YDSA, Young Democratic Socialists of America, published a new resolution last month urging its members across over 100 university chapters nationwide to join, quote, a student strike for Palestine. The purpose of the resolution is to reignite the anti-Israel protests and tent encampments that spread to over 40 American and Canadian college campuses during the 23-24 academic year. Encampments were set up to protest the war in Gaza, which began with Hamas, of course, terrorists invading Israel's southern border, brutally killing over 1,200 men, women, and children, and kidnapping 250 people, both alive and deceased, into the Gaza enclave. Protesters demanded that colleges divest from companies doing business with Israel, in Israel or with Israel, but this has yielded little response from many school administrations. So these chapters are once again being encouraged to organize democratically run campaigns demanding their schools' divestment from Israel, a ceasefire in Gaza, and free speech on campus, the report stated. During previous protests, Jewish students reportedly felt unsafe on campuses, and violent incidents occurred at several universities, including UCLA, Columbia, and some Ivy League schools across the U.S. The Free Press report cited an article published by the YDSA, in which a member claimed that the encampments did not win, despite being the largest national student movement of our lifetime. On Wednesday, we didn't report this, but it was great news. Columbia University President Minouche Shafik announced her resignation following months of campus protests that had turned violent. She previously testified before a congressional panel investigating anti-Semitism on college campuses, acknowledging that her school could do more to combat the issue. You think so? This is kind of the ground zero. The center was Columbia there in New York. Columbia University announced last week that the threat to the safety has escalated, and they will now restrict campus access to individuals with school IDs and their registered guests. According to a Reuters report, many college campuses are tightening protest rules, updating disciplinary processes, and increasing security in preparation for the upcoming semester. So we will see, but here we go again, more of the same protests. And sadly, a lot of them have been violent, have been, again, destructive, and so we will see what happens. But they plan on keep on protesting until something happens in Gaza that I guess it meets their liking. and nothing seems to, they never can. Here's the problem with these people. They're never satisfied. They're always angry. They're always angry at something. And if they're not angry at this, they'll get angry at something else. And that's the problem with those today that are protesting in these different universities around the world. They have no real hope because they don't know the Lord. They don't know who they are. They don't know why they're here. They don't know what's going to happen to them when they die. They think they're a product of mindless evolution. So they just born, live, and die, and that's it. And it's sad when you have no hope that way. All right. Now, speaking of schools, this is headline 4. This comes from the UK. Totalitarian UK schools to teach students to identify extremist content. Children, get this, children in England will be taught how to spot extremist content and misinformation online under planned changes to the school curriculum, the Education Secretary has said. And according to the Education Secretary, remember, the Labour government just took over, the far left Labour, and they're instituting new things already. And this is one of their things they're instituting. Bridget Phillipson said she was launching a review of the curriculum in primary and secondary schools to embed critical thinking across multiple subjects and arm children against putrid conspiracy theories. That's a way of saying anything non-woke that comes across that you hear from your parents or you hear anywhere else, you're not to believe, and you need to know how to identify these people that are saying this. Because remember, like our governor, Gavin Newsom, last few years has called us who believe in the Bible, believe in God as regressives. We're not progressives. We're a bunch of Neanderthals. And so here in the UK, they're gonna teach them to identify this Neanderthal belief, such as believing in a God, believing in a final revelation from God in the Bible and the such like. That's why our curriculum, go on to say, will develop plans to embed critical skills and lessons to arm our children against the disinformation, fake news, and putrid conspiracy theories awash on social media. Our renewed curriculum will always put high and rising standards in core subjects. That's non-negotiable. In other words, the leftist mantra is what's going to be there. Alongside, we will create a broad, knowledge-rich curriculum that widens access to cultural subjects and gives people the knowledge and skills they need to thrive at work and throughout life. Now, this alarming trend is going to continue. Students from kindergarten on will not be taught to think, but rather to be on the lookout for any story that would contradict the woke, progressive mindset of our fallen world. All this comes from not a non-Christian, please understand this, from an anti-Christian view of the world. This is who these people are. They're not just non-Christians, they're anti-Christians. So again, here's what our job is. We're to look to the Bible to have a proper understanding of who God is, who we are, why we are here, what's going to happen to us when we die. We cannot overemphasize the importance of knowing what God says in all these matters. And again, only an understanding of God's word will guarantee we can go through life knowing these 3 basic things: our identity, who we are, our purpose, why we're here, and our destiny, what's going to happen after this life is over. That's why we urge you here on Breaking News, not just to look at stories about last days or anything like that, but also about who Jesus Christ is, what the Bible teaches about God, the nature of humanity, how we're to work with our fellow human beings. There's so many subjects there. Again, our website, Educating Our World, 65 books on 11 different biblical subjects that deal with all of this in great detail. It's all free. Please take advantage of it and use the time here, not just to look at, the headlines and the daily events, but to know who your God is and know what he expects from us, because this is our job. We're here to be salt and light in the world. Paul told the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 5, we are ambassadors for Christ. We are his spokesman. So we need to do the job that God has set out for us. All right, I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. We'll be back later with more breaking news. Until then, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.